Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Automotive Logistics and Supply Chain Live. Christopher Ludwig here, Editor-in-Chief at Automotive Logistics and Ultima Media. And you've joined us this session in the morning if you're in the US, or obviously afternoon, evening, in other parts of the world for a look at service parts, logistics and supply chain, and all the factors going into transformation in this important part of the automotive supply chain. I always enjoy taking some time to focus on the service parts side and do some compare contrasting. It's obviously an aspect of service which needs to be fast, extremely service oriented. We're always talking about next morning delivery, often even same day delivery to meet customer requirements. And so you see OEMs doing a lot of innovative things in terms of how they reach that service network with as much frequency and accuracy as possible, at the same time of course, balancing the inventory needs. And of course, then you have the complexity on the supply side too, given that service parts are a lower volume than production. They can sometimes be issues in trying to compete for that part, shall we say. So it's always an interesting part of the supply chain. And I think COVID times raised a number of particularly relevant sides. One, at least, that service parts were essential business, as parts are needed to keep things going. Not least for recovery efforts, hospital ambulances, police vehicles, etc. So this part of the supply chain, in most cases, didn't shut down and was maybe one of the first to adapt to what we call the new normal in terms of different regulations and requirements and having to manage that. But more broadly, even looking beyond COVID, we see impacts from, or will see impacts from electrification in terms of new part numbers. We see the rise of e-commerce, the impact it has here, and of course changing demand of vehicle types and products. So it's always fast moving in this side, as I'm sure my guests will agree, and that's my pleasure to bring with us two really senior leaders and decision makers across major car makers, focused particularly here in North America. Very nice to have with us Mike Schober, who's the Vice President of Parts Supply Operations at Toyota North America, who has responsibility on the service parts side, but also aspects of inbound, as Toyota has an integrated organization there. And also very pleased to have Goel, Executive Vice President for Group After Sales and Service at Volkswagen Group of America. Anu, in this role, oversees the service parts side, as well as finished vehicle logistics. But obviously here we'll look in particular service parts. So Anu, Mike, great to have both of you with us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Yeah, fantastic. So, let's start with the topic inevitably of the time in the day in terms of logistics in the time of COVID, service parts logistics in the time of COVID. I'd like to get a bit of a status update from each of you in terms of the impacts you're seeing right now, perhaps starting with demand and how that's still being worked through in your supply chains. We'll start with you, Mike, from Toyota's side.
Sure, you bet. First of all, hello to all of your audience online today. Happy to be here. It's certainly been an interesting journey, to say the least, over the last 6 to 7 months. As we've kind of evolved through this pandemic. It was a period of very strong demand that suddenly fell off pretty significantly once things started to really evolve with COVID-19, and then very quick recovery, frankly speaking. I don't think there was a lot of forecasters out there that thought demand was going to return so strongly, both for automotive parts and service parts, as actually happened. So I can tell you where we stand today, and that is that while our demand has not fully returned to where it was in previous year levels, it is very strong and continues to grow. In fact, this past week, we've seen some of the highest shipping volume lines coming, with orders coming from our dealers than we've seen, since the start of the pandemic. So volume is very strong. A few segments that are off, and ones that you would expect. For example, collision parts, and that's kind of a national trend. Fewer people out on the road, fewer fender benders happening. So certain segments are down, but other segments are up, like e-commerce business. We're seeing a little bit more DIY repairs that are happening out there, and that's reflecting in our e-commerce business. And some other parts of our business, we've seen some very unique demand patterns, some very slow moving parts We've seen some higher levels of demand than we had in the past, and that may be a function of some people holding on to their cars a little bit longer and or maybe holding off on repairs and then now getting some of those repairs done. But overall, I will tell you that on the service part side, while we're not exactly where we were, volume is very strong at this point for us.
Thanks, Mike. Anu, do you want to give us some perspective from Volkswagen side?
All right. Good morning, good afternoon to everyone out there. As Chris and Mike have both reiterated, so obviously from our side, similar to what Mike talked about, for us, for VW and Audi, the first couple months of the year were actually better than planned. So demand was good. COVID hit, and obviously a significant drop. And depending on the brand, we're talking 60, 70, 80% drop March, April, May timeframe. And as Mike said, it has recovered, not to pre-COVID levels, but it has not been a U recovery. It's been a V recovery. So we dipped at the bottom in the late April, early May timeframe. And since then, demand has been almost like a straight line back up to where it is low double digits below budget pre-COVID levels. In addition, as Mike said, there has been a change in, if you look at the commodity breakdown, collision, obviously, right, as you mentioned, less density on the roads, less miles driven, all this stuff impacts the collision business. But what surprised me, and I've been doing this for a long time, was maintenance and light repair is significantly up. One of our initial thoughts was maintenance light repair, which is independent repair shops, is where people would go. But we have seen a significant increase in our maintenance light repair. And part of that is attributed to, I believe, the sanitation practices in our dealerships. Customers feel safer. We have contactless service, etc., which some of the independent repair shops may or may not have, and some of them may or may not have been classified essential businesses too. So I think there are a couple factors impacting vehicle owners' options that went into driving them into our dealerships. So both brands have not recovered at the same percentage level. VW has recovered faster than the Audi brand, but the Audi brand didn't dip as much as the VW brand did, if that makes sense. So there was a difference between premium, non-premium segment as well.
Okay, interesting. So that gives a sense of demand. I mean, somewhat a V recovery, which is obviously encouraging from that side. Let's talk a little bit about how it impacts the supply chain. Maybe we can start further downstream. Let's start upstream. Sorry. So on the supply side, in terms of, are you seeing bottlenecks or having any issues, with supplies, getting supplies in any areas? We know we've been talking in this event, for example, of a lot of high limited capacity on the ocean side. There's a big push. A lot of plants are working overtime to catch up, obviously, for production. So how does that impact for some of your for your supply side, be it international or domestic there? So maybe again, start with Mike.
Yeah, so it's a great question because really that's where a large part of the challenge is right now. As again, we've evolved through managing through the pandemic. We did have this period early on, to a news point, where sales did drop pretty significantly. It was for a relatively short period of time, and depending on the region, some areas dropped more significantly than others. For example, maybe like in the New York, New Jersey area, we saw demand down almost 70%, but that's where a lot of the epicenter of the crisis was happening for a while there in that particular region. So, when we had suddenly a condition with a lot of ships on the water coming in with supply, we were in a position for a very short period of time where we actually had some overstock. But we knew that we had to figure out how to manage through that situation and not try to balance between not over ordering when you have so much supply initially, and then not being caught shorthanded when things started to pick up. But we're in a position now where we're in a challenging time with the supply base, and and it's just a function of that curve being that V curve, and there's a lot of pressure on suppliers to produce not only for high service parts demand, but also for for manufacturing parts demand. And a lot of the suppliers out there, they're doing a fantastic job. They're working overtime, in some cases 7 days a week to try to keep pace with the demand. But, they have a lot of the same challenges that many other businesses do out there, which is, during the time of the down period, especially when the plants were not producing for a couple of months domestically here in the U.S., they lost some of their labor capacity. People left for other jobs, and trying to get some of those people back into their operations has been a challenge. And a similar situation with variable workforce, that's been a challenge also, getting stability on that front. So for a lot of our suppliers, again, as I mentioned, they are working 7 days a week, multiple shifts to try to keep pace with that demand. And in some cases, we've had to help support in those situations where certain suppliers were actually, reaching out for help to say, if I don't get some help from you, Toyota, to help manage, our production schedule and to understand, what your requirements are going forward, explicitly, then we might, actually shut down your plant. So we've had a lot of activity with a lot of our suppliers, embedding some of our people in our suppliers to try to keep them so that they can meet that requirement. But that's where our challenge is right now, is on the supply side.
Anu, does that jive with what your experience for the Volkswagen Group is too?
Yeah, in large part. For the service parts business here in the U.S., we have three main sources. We have the mothership out of Germany with Kassel for both brands. That's the majority of the service parts that we bring into the U.S. So we're kind of lucky that it's a master depot for the world that's dealing with, pick a number, 10, 12,000 suppliers. So they've got a little bit of a buffer there for us. Then we've got the U.S. domestic, obviously suppliers primarily for the vehicles built out of Chattanooga, Atlas, Crossport, Passat. And then we've got a growing supply base out of Mexico, right? Jetta, Tiguan, Gulf, etc. So if you take those one at a time, the German supply base, or the supply from Germany, basically since the start, right? Because the mothership kicked into full action with all our global resources, was running at about 95% of pre-COVID levels, right? So we could get 90 to 95% of what we were putting into the system, right? U.S. suppliers obviously varied by state with shutdowns, so we were living off the inventory that we had in our depots, 2 to 3 months, typically, right, with a 3 to 4 turn rate. That's what we had, and we were bringing that down. And then Mexico was the concern, right? The spread there, the bringing back up to speed. So similar to what Mike said, we had a watch list of suppliers. We helped people financially where we could. We helped them logistically where we could. So we were managing those three elements of supply. Now, labor, as Mike mentioned, I think obviously supply chains are very complex, and for people that don't understand it, you really you got to peel back the onion here. But labor has been a significant concern. Our not just in our depots and our ports, but our suppliers, absenteeism, the broader sense of the word, has been running mid 20 percentage points, right? Attrition for some of our suppliers, our processors, has been running 30 to 40%, right? Then you put in the stimulus package where with the unemployment checks, with the 600 bump in the US, some people are making more staying at home than they would have if they were working for us, right? And since we had furloughed some people, we still covered their healthcare. So you had multiple variables kicking into this, but labor was and is a key concern. And the health and robustness of suppliers south of the border is a concern. Less so from the European supply parts, but those are the two areas of watch and concern for us. Then you bring into the fact that global vessels basically came to a halt and anchored in place. Carriers, in large part, are facing similar issues to everybody else: drivers, health, safety, all that stuff. It's I'm pleasantly surprised every day at how it is running. I think we had earlier when we talked, if someone would have told me this is where we'd be as we were going through April, May, I would have said absolutely not possible. But the resiliency has been fantastic, right, to support the demand that we're seeing out there.
Mm-hmm. So interesting on these supply side issues. Is there, from a logistics point of view, measures, contingencies that you're starting to take or considering taking, to kind of address some of that either now or anticipation should it get worse for some critical areas? I mean, Mike, you talked about what Toyota is doing in the supporting suppliers directly, in some cases embedded in the plants. Are you also trying to build stock where you can, or take other measures in the logistics side?
It's a great question, and maybe to a news point. Despite some of the challenges that are out there, it is pretty phenomenal what we're seeing in terms of supplyability. So if you take a look at, for example, our fill rate numbers right now, we have very strong fill rate on the service parts side across our network. The challenge is usually just a handful of suppliers that are causing back orders, and those suppliers we need to get involved with more personally with I have a supplier development team that reports up through me that we leverage to help them. But at the end of the day, the things that we're really doing now are just taking a look proactively at suppliers that are missing our delivery due dates for our POs, and then trying to put a trend to that and seeing, have we got an abnormal condition with that supplier, and getting ahead of that situation to try to grasp, okay, what is the issue here, and when do we think we'll get back on track, and then making the determination at that point, do we need to do a little bit more triage there, or this is a short-term blip and they're going to be working through the weekend to get caught back up and we should be back on track.
Mm-hmm. So and similar from your side, Anu, are there measures that you're taking, in anticipation?
Yeah, I mean, it's you do the you can call it the basics, but the supplier watch list started off with 80 some suppliers on it. I think we're now down to about 30. So you keep staying on that every day. We help out with transportation, if and where we can, right? So we may run some milk runs or something to get parts in from suppliers. Really haven't had to beef up inventory on anything specifically to buffer it. What you do have to watch is specific commodity or part demand, because it is different. So you can't rely on historical forecasting methods as we go through this, because like I said, collision down. Now's about the time you'd be building up collision inventory for the winter season. Maintenance, light repair, 400% above what you'd expect on certain commodities. Accessories has been strong throughout this because of used car sales. So we're you could argue manually monitoring the accessories demand, because that doesn't mirror service parts, typical life cycle demand. And then the one that does get particular and specific attention these days is any service actions or campaigns or recall parts. Because those, especially at this period of time, right? If it's coming out of a supplier that's struggling to keep up with production or service parts, we're spending a lot of time with suppliers helping them prioritize what we need. So the old, you go by the due date, first in, first out that I sent you, right, to keep up with the system. I think we're doing a lot of this shuffling around, where I know that's 10th on your list, but I need that moved up to first. Right now, sometimes that leads to inefficiencies in the supplier's production process, but that's where you have to have conversations. If I do this, what impact did I have to your recovery plan? Right, so that's where the conversations are taking place.
So a couple of really interesting points to pick up on there. Well, one is if I understand it, the sophisticated data analysis, demand forecasting, all the retail inventory management kinds of tools that perhaps have helped in the past, obviously have some limits to this situation, given how unprecedented, I suppose, and unpredictable that impact is. But just also to pick up on that last point about needing to work closely, perhaps on the production side or other supply side, to prioritize things. Mike, maybe I'll start with you, because Toyota has a more integrated organization than it has had in the past, from service parts and the inbound production parts. I think officially as of early last year, and obviously that was beginning over time. And you mentioned a supplier management group which reports up through to you. So not to make it all about that organization, but to what extent has that, is that playing that role there, and does it help to be able to assure that this prioritization is a bit more aligned and avoids kind of impacting too badly on the other sides?
Yeah, there's no doubt. So that was a big effort at Toyota over the last couple of years. Previously, manufacturing parts logistics and service parts logistics were handled separately. And frankly speaking, we all had our stories as to why we couldn't integrate those two functions. The plants would say, well, you can't shut down our production. Service parts, you have a little bit more time to stock your warehouses to manage demand with safety stock and those other things, and you have to operate on a different time schedule with the plants. Literally, we're running at any given time in our supply chain only a half a day ahead of what the plant needs. So it's a very tight timeline, and if a truck doesn't show up at the plant, you can literally shut down a line. It's literally just in time. So we were able to get through a lot of that over the last year and really demonstrate that we can work together and use things like cross stocks, where we pick up both service parts and manufacturing parts, bring them to a cross stock, and then let that dedicated logistics go from the cross stock to the plant on its tight schedule, and then have those parts that are service parts on that truck that came into that cross stock. Then it goes out from there in the schedule that we need to get it to our service parts depots. So I think for me, the biggest thing that we've seen through this crisis is that, to your point, having a seat at the table. My previous boss always said, if you don't have a seat at the table, then you're probably on the menu, right? So for us, we've been able to have that seat at the table and just keep it top of mind that service parts are as important to customer retention as vehicle sales are. Not that wasn't already grasped, but everybody has their priorities and their silos and their own targets that they're working towards. And so for us, it's been really key as we've gone through this crisis to be able to keep that priority of service parts at the top of the agenda, along with manufacturing parts, and then make it all work. And we found that we've been able to really do that and have both groups work together. So it's been a real positive.
Now, Anu, I know that the organization isn't officially set up that way at Volkswagen Group. Actually, you have a more direct connection with the outbound vehicle side. However, obviously there's a Chattanooga plant, as you referred to. Yesterday we had, or was it 2 days ago, I lose track, Susanna Lehman, the director of production, talking through. So, have the lines of collaboration across those groups increased by necessity here? Can you talk a little bit through that from the Volkswagen side?
Yeah, I mean, so organizationally, we're different. I'm a little bit jealous with the Toyota setup, right? Because I've been on the service part side, I've been on production, purchasing, et cetera. But yeah, through the crisis, we are very closely linked to our manufacturing logistics team, right? So Suzanne Lehman, as you had mentioned, from Mexico, and then our colleagues down in Chattanooga. And every company says they have the customer first mentality, right? If I've got a customer down, I'll pull a part from production versus build a new car. Okay, great. A couple questions you always got to ask yourself: how many times have you used that in the last 6 months, a year, right? And if you talk to most companies, they can count on one hand the number of times they've had to do that, for a couple of reasons. The bulk of our demand is past model. It's not current model. It's not what's coming to the plant. It may be at a different level. The plant may have a module coming in, right? A subassembly when we need a specific component. So you can say that, but where this really gets down to is, at least in our case, the philosophy at the Volkswagen Group is, when you're a supplier in production, you're the supplier for life of the part. Unlike my prior two employers, where once it went past model, in general, you were looking for people that specialized in service parts supply, right? Low volume batch runs. So you didn't have a commonality of supply base. Here we do. So the communication between production and service logistics has to be tighter than in other places because you're balancing off plant running and service parts demand. But in general, when you look at what it takes to make a service part, you're not going to impact production demand, right? I mean, it may be on the same line, okay, and they may have a 4-hour setup and things like that. You get into those types of cases, but that's where you got to have the individual part by part discussion. And what builds in that is, and some OEs have it and some don't, is there order integrity in the order types? So we've got a stock order and we've got a daily, which is basically an emergency order and then a warranty. Are all emergency orders car downs? Okay. Are some daily orders actually car downs, but the dealer's ordering it that way because he gets a stock order discount and gets it overnight before he opens the next morning, right? So you've got that extra layer of complexity. So we've got critical alerts that help us identify this customer down so we can go into action. So 1,000 moving pieces there, but yeah, the communication has improved significantly with our manufacturing colleagues over the past 5-6 months. And to everyone's credit, we're working to satisfy total corporate objectives and not individual functional objectives.
Mm-hmm. So very interesting from both sides. Try to move slightly away, not entirely away from Corona. I think it's hard for us to do that in general, but pick up on something that you mentioned, Mike. You mentioned both of you mentioned actually. Mike, you mentioned e-commerce is up, and Anu referred to contactless service and measures around that. And it does point to me anyway, at least to some future business models or growth in some business models around the digital service and other models for delivery, perhaps. Are you seeing some impacts in the service parts network in terms of the services you'll provide to dealers or other customers, or even direct, for example? Maybe Mike, I can start with you. Just how you see that in the future too.
So what I can tell you, there's a lot certainly going on with what's happening with being connected today to the customer, and where we see opportunities to grow our business through the internet and being connected with our customers through their vehicles and other things. But I can tell you right now, for us, we have seen growth in our internet sales, and that's an area that we are putting a lot of focus on at this point. I think all of the OEs need to focus on that space, because there's a lot of competition from that space, from Amazon and other major market makers, and it's only going to grow as people become more committed to those platforms, not just for purchasing automotive parts, but other things that they order. Through those platforms, they become more comfortable and engaged with those platforms. So for us, we see that we need to continue to build our presence digitally with the customer, and that means trying to do things that entice the customer to come to our website, and then to order through our website. So one of the things that we offer for both our Lexus and Toyota divisions through internet sales purchases, we offer free shipping. So clearly that's an attractant for a lot of customers that are ordering, and have a lot of different choices to order through the internet. So for us, we're really spending a lot of time to understand how customers order through the internet. How can we be more competitive with part sales through the internet? And what are some of those marketing strategies that we can use to grow that business? So it's an exciting field, and we're seeing growth. And my role on the supply chain side is to try to figure out how to make our supply chain a competitive advantage to support that effort. So, one of the things that we are doing through our PDCs for some regions, we are shipping direct to the customer from our depots. We supplement that strategy with our dealers also shipping directly to the customer. Customer orders through the internet to the dealer orders through the DC, through my group. We then supply the dealer, and the dealer ships to the customer. But some customers don't want that lead time. So we are now putting a large toe in the water to try to expand that offering to the customer, reduce that lead time, and ship directly to them from the DC. So I see more of that kind of activity happening, and how our supply chain can support that business.
Well, that's fascinating and a really important step, I think, in the potential business model there and how the supply chain will support that. Anu, how does that align with the experience for Volkswagen and Audi in the US right now?
Yeah, I mean, when people ask me this question, we are by no means on the leading edge of this, right? It is a significantly important part of changing customer expectations, not just during COVID, but post-COVID, because I think it's going to change behavior going forward. Our digitalization strategy was, adding functionality to what we have today over the next few years. And as we've gone through this, we've realized we need to reprioritize that and pull some of those things up, and some of the things that we had planned on productivity, quality, other types of things take a back seat because we punted those out and brought the digitalization, apps, functionality, portals, gateways, ability to talk to the service tech by video and chat when your car is in the shop. Everyone talks about online scheduling, but is their scheduling system basically just sending the dealer an email, right? It's an upfront thing. You send it behind the scenes and the dealer responds and you do it, or is it tapped into the dealer DMS system, right? So it's not just the upfront uses, it's all the back linkages, right? And then when you look at the various brands, everyone's got different thoughts and priorities, and no one can justify the investment for separate platforms. So you got to get everybody in a room and align those types of things. So we've seen a change, upheaval, reprioritization of our investments, CapEx spend, and functionality, right, to match what the customers want. Still working through, we only sell through dealers, right? We do the build to, ship to, as Mike said, drop directly to a customer. But we use our wholesalers to really get to that market, right? So you spend time with the wholesalers saying, what can we do together with the supply chain to meet the end customer requirement, right, for the do-it-yourselfers, for the independent repair shops, for the non-do-it-yourselfers. So lots of thoughts, ideas. We are a company that loves pilots. We have lots of pilots in play, right? So you dip, toes, fingers, everything in the water to see which one works well, and then that's the way you go, right? So I think we know where we want to get to. The question will be which blocks we'll be stepping on as we get there over the next 6, 10, 12, 24 months.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll be very excited to watch how that develops. And Mike, just to kind of go back to that briefly on your side, because so it was if I understood correctly, it was a bit of a mixed picture there. So in some cases, encouraging customers to order direct on the Toyota website for the direct shipments, but also some of those direct shipments to customers also were still via the dealer, not just shipped to the dealer, but could it be a dealer order that went direct to the customer, for example?
That's correct. Some of the dealers, they still want to own that relationship with the customer. And it's a messy business that when you have things like returns, and if a customer does have a problem with a shipment, who do they call at that point? Do we want them calling our call center at Toyota headquarters, or do we want them working directly with the dealer because we don't want to disrupt that relationship between the dealer and the customer? So we're still trying to work our way through some of those challenges at this point, but suffice it to say, some dealers choose to have that relationship directly with the customer and ship to them, and others choose for us to do that. And the dealers have the choice to choose amongst those options, and we let them do that.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. I wanted to touch on, we've got a few more minutes if you'll indulge me. I wanted to touch on electrification. Again, looking ahead a little bit here. I knew obviously Volkswagen will start producing EV in the US and is looking to target growth. I'm sure Toyota has obviously is a long leader in hybrid, but over time we'll see more electrification too. Can you give us a sense for how significant an impact this will be in terms of your supply chain processes, whether it's the spaces and operations in the depots or the handling or your supply base? Do you see this as quite an important stage coming up over let's say the next 5 to 10 years as that kind of grows? And I'll start with you there, Anu, since we know some of the things that are coming in the pipe for for Volkswagen Group.
Yeah, great question. As a company, we are obviously all in on electrification, And globally, we've committed 50 billion euros in that range to get cars out worldwide, right? Our first one's on the Volkswagen side is going to hit later this year. Audi's already out there with e-tron, et cetera. So in terms of changes to the business and supply chain, I'm not sure anybody knows. Everyone's got an opinion or thought. You'll hear the doomsday naysayers saying it will impact traditional service parts business by 30 to 40%, right? When you build in automatic collision avoidance systems and no more maintenance and light repair with oil changes, spark plugs, and all that kind of stuff, right? So you've got to figure out how to make up that revenue and profit as a company elsewhere. You've got another group of people that will tell you that it's high barriers of entry. You're not going to have repair shops at every corner. Customers will have limited places to go. So dealerships are going to have a automatic retention with the sale of this. So what else can you do with that customer now that you've got them tied to your brand, your dealership for service, right? Probably somewhere there in between. The other one that gets into this is what do you think the volume for electric vehicles in the market is, right? Some people will tell you it's 7%, some will tell you it's 25%. Question is over what period of time, right? I think it will obviously impact traditional service parts business, right? But I think, so there's the downside. I think there's upside when you look at historical retention rates for OEs on service parts business. I think there's a offset with increased loyalty for electric vehicle customers, right? They're early adopters. They love the vehicles. They want to do the tech talk with you, right? So how do you engage and tie in with them? So that's the business aspect of it. I think near term, not a significant impact. I think it may down the road, it'll evolve and we'll all adjust, but I think there's upside here for new businesses and services as well, right? Instead of just, oh my God, it's going away, what am I going to do? On the process and supply chain side, yeah, our ports, the handling of the vehicles is different. The shipment of the vehicles is different. We need charging of the vehicles at the ports, right? Finished vehicle side. On the service parts side, the handling of the batteries. Hazardous material, right? Depends if you got full batteries, modules, etc. You've got to prepare your depots for that or use a third-party provider that specializes in doing this. We've spent a lot of time focused on the recycling and return of batteries from dealers, the dealer handling processes, right? Because it's different for them. It's the investment in the equipment at the dealerships to take the battery out and replace it, which is, can run $15,000, $20,000. So you have rent-a-tool type programs where you send the tools with the battery so that they can do it and then return it with the return battery in these special cases. So it will be a significant disruption. I heard someone at a conference talk about you're going to be going from service mechanics to master electricians in the dealerships, right? You're going to have some level of that, right? So everyone's going to have to adjust, prepare, and adapt, and that's what we've spent the better part of the last 12 to 18 months doing in our ports and our depots, at our dealerships.
Great insight there. Thank you, Anu. And Mike, what about from Toyota's side?
Yeah, I think pretty much the same things that Anu was saying. Just from an supply chain operations perspective, there is a lot that comes with these big lithium-ion type batteries. They're big, they're heavy, they're hard to handle, and the things that we have to manage in the future as we intend to grow in this space also is that how do the dealers handle this? How do they move these big heavy batteries, within their stores? How do we drop them off in a way that the dealer can then easily transfer them into their shop? No dealers want to hang on to these batteries in the first place, whether they're the nickel metal hydride for the hybrid vehicles or the lithium ion batteries that we have now with our plug-in Prius. They don't want to store those things in their dealership, so we carry a lot of that inventory within our environment with a very short ship timeline. So we're going to have to figure out how, as we expand further into this electrification space, how we're going to solve issues with the dealer, how we're going to solve supply issues, how we're going to ensure short lead time, and then how to manage the warehousing of this. As it stands now for the lithium ion batteries, we don't store those things in our warehouses. We use offsite a 3PL storage where we have a more of a climate controlled environment, where there is the space to store these batteries because they're hazmat with the right kind of sprinkler systems over them and those things. So we're going to have to get a handle on that, because I think that's going to be the most significant impact, at least from an operations perspective, how to handle these things.
Absolutely, and that's something that we've obviously spent quite a bit of time in the last few days talking about across various sides of the supply chain, but really important to note on the service parts side too. I think that's a really interesting point that you raise as well, Anu, around the potential retention aspects, which can offset some of the part number aspects that may reduce. We're pretty much at the end. I want to close with a question. If you like, since we're addressing quite a global audience of supply chain management logistics experts, including providers and 3PLs, etc., I just thought it would be a good opportunity to hear from you the area that you think Toyota and Volkswagen on the service parts side need the most support from, innovation from, to kind of get through. I suppose that's two different things, right? Maybe one is to get through this current moment, and the other would be the longer term side. But if you have to choose an area you'd like to identify with your providers and partners to so that they can help to serve you better. So Mike, I'll start with you there.
Yeah, on the service parts side, really, it's a couple of things. One is speed to delivery. We're always focusing on speed to delivery. How can we shorten that order to delivery lead time for our customers? Our dealers are in competition every day with the AutoZones of the world and others that are providing multiple same-day shipments, and it won't cut it anymore in our mind to have the traditional overnight dedicated delivery service to meet the needs of wholesale repairs and, frankly speaking, the changing expectations that customers have about how quickly they should get their problem solved. We need to move forward in providing those solutions for our dealers that allow us to be a lot more flexible and faster in our delivery service. So that's one. I'm always looking for those opportunities. The second is, we spoke a little bit about digitalization. There is a future where we are going to have very connected cars that tie into service parts supply chain, where you have predictive analytics that are telling a customer it's time that this part be replaced because it may fail. That feeds up to our fulfillment group, so that we can get that part to the dealer ahead of when the customer is going to show up. So we see a lot of activity happening in that space, and for us it is more about learning what that image is going to look like, and then how could providers help us to be able to meet that image.
Fantastic. Anu, what would you add on that?
Just a couple of thoughts to add on. We'll reinforce what Mike said, and then maybe just one or two others, right? Because it is a good question. What keeps you up at night going forward, right? So obviously, speed to delivery is a biggie. I tie in a little bit to that, the quality of delivery. You want to piss off a customer, get them something, and then have it not right or damaged, right? When you think about what you get from Amazon, if it arrives, right, when they were at the 7, 8, 9 days, and then it was during the middle of the pandemic, then you had to order it again, and short supply. So if you really want to piss off a customer, get it wrong, even if it's within your target, right? 99.8% damage-free delivery, right? We're green, but those 2/10 are loyal. That's lost loyalty and retention, right? So I think you always got to keep an eye on that. The digital front, obviously, looking for people with thoughts and ideas. We do not have this market cornered, but not just digitalization from an operational perspective, from a customer expectation perspective, right? What do our customers want? Because at the end of the day, our job is to provide that service, right? And sometimes customers can't tell you what they want. And is what a customer wants the same thing that a parts manager or a service manager will tell you that they want? So I think you got to filter that out. And then the third area that keeps me up at night is, as we go, as our business, more and more of these fixes on cars are software updates. Are the software updates backwards compatible, or are the commodities that will be with technology be backwards compatible? So if you've got a 5 or 6 year old car and it gets a new battery, right? Right, we got new battery technology. Will that new battery work in the 5-year-old electric vehicle? And if it doesn't, where can a customer get a 5-year-old, full lithium ion battery if the technology's moved on and suppliers are focusing elsewhere, right? That one keeps me up at night. Just think about service for, your tech gadgets, right? After a couple of years, it's not a 15-year, which is our retention period on service parts. Our supplier is going to continue to be able to provide cost-effective past model parts for technology-related items? Or do you have to start thinking a cottage industry for recycling and reman of tech components? Right? That one, as I sit in these meetings, and the battery technology changes so quickly that I don't think anyone's thinking about how am I going to service a car 2, 3, 4 years, right? Let alone 10 years down the road, right? And if you go tell a customer that bought an electric vehicle from you that I'm sorry, I can't replace the most expensive part of your car, right? 4 years out, what do you do? Right? It's not like these things are interchangeable, right? So that's the one that keeps me up at night, is our ability to service parts that are technology related for our retention policies.
So some fascinating thoughts to end on there, and important ones too. Even on that last point there, the legal requirements in so many markets are certainly for 7, 10, sometimes even longer to be able to service. So clearly these are industry-wide critical issues, and both of you have raised some very important sides, both on the service, supply, and the kind of business side, customer side too. So I want to thank both of you, Goel from Volkswagen Group, Mike Schober from Toyota North America. This has really been a fascinating discussion, really unpicking a lot of the issues in the service parts. We look forward to keeping this going and maintaining that for our audience. I hope you've enjoyed that. Join us again in about 13 minutes where we're having a panel discussion with a number of OEM leaders on supply chain logistics reinvention. We'll be joined by Nissan, Volvo Cars, General Motors, and Globe America, talking further there. But for now, I want to thank our great panelists here on the service parts side again, and we'll see you again in a couple of minutes. In the meantime, please enjoy us further networking, and we'll be back to you soon.